Welcome everyone to the California Poor People's Campaign welcome session. We're glad that you have taken the time this afternoon to join us. My name is Nell My Hand. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm on Ohlone land, which is also known as Oakland. And I'm here co-presenting this session with Reverend Rowan Fairgrove. Do you want to introduce yourself, Reverend Rowan?
Hi, I'm Rowan. I'm from Tamian land in San Jose, California, and my pronouns are she, her. And I'm really glad you're here.
I got involved with the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival a few years ago when the Truth and Poverty Tour came across the country. And Oakland was one of the stops, being a place that's heavily impacted by poverty. And I got invited to be a testifier there and tell my story because the campaign is dedicated and devoted to amplifying the voices of people who are directly impacted by poverty like me. And so I was honored to be able to share my story there. How did you get connected, Reverend Rowan?
So as you can see from the banner behind me, I'm a member of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, and we are a national partner of the Poor People's Campaign. And when the 40 days of action was happening, we put things in our local libraries weekly and encourage people to go to Sacramento. And then there wasn't much for a while. And then in 2019, I got to go to DC to the Moral Action Congress, and I was totally hooked. And I've been doing lots of work for the campaign ever since.
Great, thank you so much. And so just a little bit of Zoom housekeeping. We want to ask you to stay on mute unless you're speaking to the room, basically, so because it is easier, to be heard if there's only one mic that's live at a time. And the meeting is closed captioned, and so you should be able to enable the closed captioning by clicking the CC icon at the bottom of your screen. And yeah, if you would put your questions and comments in the chat, that would be great. And so after that, we're going to do a short presentation. And then after that presentation, we're going to have breakout rooms based on the region that you're in. And so what we want to ask you to do is to rename yourself by going to putting your cursor over your picture, and you'll see 3 dots in the upper right-hand corner. If you click on those 3 dots, it gives you a set of options, including the option to rename yourself. And so what we want to ask you to do is, based on where you live, rename yourself. So I live in the Bay Area, and so I'm going to put a BA at the very front of my name. And so other people who live in the Bay Area, please do that. If you live in the Central Coast region, San Luis Obispo, Ventura, or Santa Barbara County, please put a CC in the beginning of your name. If you're from the Inland Empire, IE, Los Angeles, LA, Orange County, OC, Northeast San Fernando Valley, NE, San Diego, SD, and Sacramento, ST. And AL, if you don't live in any of those regions, but you live in some other part of California, and you're in what we call the at-large region. And so we'll put all those in the chat so that you can see those and name yourself appropriately. Thank you so much. And with that, anything else, Reverend Ron, before we start the screen share of the slides?
No, I think we're ready to go.
Okay, great.
So this is a short presentation where we'll give a bit of history about the 1968 campaign, the 2017 call, and the 2018 launch of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. The structure of the campaign, some examples of how we take action, and information about how you can get involved. The image on this slide is the national campaign logo with a silhouette of a group of people with flags waving And the Words the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. And I'm really sorry, but I think I'm going to have to stop sharing for a minute because the closed captioning seems to keep me from actually advancing things, or not. All right. In 1967 and 1968, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., civil rights leaders, and many others came together to forge a campaign to bring national attention to the unjust economic conditions facing millions of people worldwide. On November 1967, Dr. King announced the Poor People's Campaign to challenge economic inequality, militarism, and poverty. He articulated a clear formula for how the poor can claim the power that resides in our communities to create a new and unsettling force. And so now we're going to watch a video of Bishop Barber being interviewed by Judy Woodruff on PBS.
Next, an effort to revive a famous movement of the 1960s focused on reducing poverty, inequality, and tackling social justice. But with such a broad agenda, will it find enough support at this polarized time? We start with a look at the campaign that began 50 years ago. Shortly before his death in 1968, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. expanded his civil rights campaign to include calls for economic justice. He called for an economic revolution that included protection and services for the poorest Americans. He would call it the Poor People's Campaign.
We're coming to get our check.
The campaign would bring together poor people from across the country and from across racial, ethnic, and geographic lines, including poor whites, for a march on Washington.
Even if you have to bring a whole family, we are going to have in Washington facilities, and we're going to have food, and we are going to demand that the government do something about these conditions.
The first step was to construct a shanty town called Resurrection City on the National Mall, housing thousands of participants in a form of nonviolent civil disobedience. Dr. King himself would never make it to the March on Washington. He died that spring. But weeks after his assassination, 50,000 people gathered in solidarity, demanding economic reform on the steps where Dr. King had professed, "I have a dream."
We come with an appeal to open the doors of America to the almost 50 million Americans who have not been given a fair share of America's wealth and opportunity.
Half a century later, a group of religious and moral leaders are planning a wave of civil disobedience in Washington, a revival of the Poor People's Campaign. It is headed in part by the Reverend William Barber, who's the co-chair of the campaign. He led demonstrators at a rally in front of the U.S. Capitol this month, and he was arrested, alongside the Reverend Jesse Jackson, a key figure in the 1968 movement. I spoke with Reverend Barber recently when he was in Washington. Reverend William Barber, welcome to the NewsHour. Thank you very much for joining us. When the original Poor People's Campaign took place, it was 50 years ago. Dr. Martin Luther King was involved. After he was assassinated, it continued. But what is the connection between then and now?
Well, thank you so much for having us. And on behalf of the campaign, the National Poor People's Campaign, National Call for Moral Revival, and my co-chair, Reverend Dr. Liz Theo Harris, let me say that the connection was, first of all, that it did continue, that people realized Dr. King was right. Racism, poverty, and militarism were interconnected. The connection today is we did a study, we commissioned a study with the Institute for Policy Studies and also had some help with Urban Institute, anecdotal and empirical data. And we did something called the Souls of Poor Folk, auditing America 50 years after the Poor People's Campaign. What did we find? Today, there are 140 million poor and low wealth people. Today, there are 250,000 people that die every year from low wealth. We have less voting rights today because of the gutting of the Voting Rights Act than we had in 1965. And we have 62 million people who are working poor, who work for less than a living wage, and 14 million children who are in poverty.
Those numbers are overwhelming. They are daunting. You're not proposing to do away with poverty, are you?
We are saying that there are 5 interlocking injustices that America has to face because they continue to cause policy violence. That is systemic racism, particularly seen through the lens of voter suppression, where people use voter suppression to get elected, and then once they get elected, they pass policies that hurt the poor, mostly white women, children, and the working poor. Systemic poverty, ecological devastation, the war economy and militarism, and the false moral narrative of religious nationalism that says you don't have to address those issues. We are saying, yes, America is going to have to face these 5 interlocking injustices and change them.
Why can't you work through the existing political system, work to elect political figures who agree with your agenda?
Well, several reasons. Number one, we had 26 presidential debates in the last presidential election. On the Democrat and Republican side, not 1 hour was spent on poverty. Not 1 hour was spent on voter suppression and restoring the Voting Rights Act. Not 1 hour on the war economy and militarism. So if we're not even having the conversation, the first thing we have to change is the attention violence. We have an attention violence when it comes to poverty and the poor, and we must change that before you can change the agenda. And it must be a movement of the people from the bottom up.
Reverend Barber, I talk to people, I've read folks who agree with much of what you are saying you want, but they also are saying you're asking for too many different things, that you should narrow your list of ambitions, that you'll have a much better chance at getting something done.
Well, then those same people should say narrow the Constitution because it's pretty ambitious. It says domestic tranquility, establishment of justice, providing for the common defense, promoting the welfare, general welfare. Narrow the moral call of the Bible that says you're supposed to care for the stranger, the hungry, the sick, the left out, the lonely, the imprisoned. Why is it that that wealthy and greed gets to ask for everything? They want tax cuts, they get that. They want to block health care, they get that. But then we tell poor people, you have to ask for one thing. 37 million people without health care, we have to fight for health care. Millions of people without living wages, we can't just ask for one thing because they are systemically interlocking injustices.
If there are so many who you define as poor in this country, why aren't we seeing more people rise up and make this argument? I mean, it's right now it's left to you and a relatively small group of people who are making this argument, having the march, having your demonstrations and so forth.
Well, I don't know if I would say a relatively small group. We have organizing committees in 40 states. We have people who are organizing. In the last 2 weeks, we've had thousands of people attend. Over nearly 2,000 people do civil disobedience, more than ever in the history of this country, simultaneously doing nonviolent moral fusion, civil disobedience. There is a rising, and so what we're doing is we're launching a movement. We're not ending a movement. We're launching a movement and calling people to action. Many people do not know how bad it is, and many people who are poor and low wealth have been broken and pushed down and ignored. But where we're going from West Virginia to Wisconsin, from Alabama to Alaska, we're finding that there are thousands of people who are saying it's time for us to stand up and refuse to be silent.
You've said that the nation's problem is not that we don't have enough money. You said it's that we don't have the moral capacity to face what ails society. What did you mean by that?
That when you look at our deepest moral framework of the Constitution and our deepest moral values of our religious tradition, we too often have a political conversation that talks about left versus right, military or middle class. That's too puny, it's too narrow. 43.5% of this country is poor and low wealth. People are dying. Even Joseph Stiglitz, the economist, said the America has to face the cost of inequality. What I'm saying is we can't just have a left-right argument anymore. We need to have a deeply moral argument that says this is not just about Democrats or Republicans. This is about America. What kind of democracy do we want to be? You cannot have a democracy continue to exist when 400 people make an average of $97,000 an hour and you lock people up who simply want 15 in the union.
Does either political party come closer to your goals?
Well, I think they can. I think they hit at it. I think, of course, the extremists who have taken over the Republican Party have just gone so far extreme. You know, they're more focused on tax cuts to the wealthy. They want to blame poor people for their problems. Democrats, on the other hand, are willing to talk about, say, the Affordable Care Act and talk about the middle class. But the reality is neither party is willing to put right in front of America the issues of systemic racism, of systemic poverty, ecological devastation, the war economy, and say the word poverty. It's almost as though we've tried to remove even saying the word poverty, when in fact the majority of the poor people in this country are white, women, children, working people, and the disabled. So we have to change our narrative in this country. And the only way you can change the narrative is to change the narrator. That's why this campaign is focused on three things: breaking through the narrative, massive voter mobilization among the poor, and power building from the bottom up.
Reverend William Barber, the co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign in 2018. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Unfortunately, the unity and organization needed for the Poor People's Campaign of 1968 to complete all three of the planned stages and form the new unsettling force capable of disrupting complacent national life and achieving an economic Bill of Rights was not easy to come by. The assassination of Dr. King and Senator Robert Kennedy, a key proponent of the campaign and presidential candidate, served to cripple the campaign and greatly limit its impact. Midway through the campaign, Robert Kennedy, whose wife had attended the Mother's Day opening of Resurrection City, was assassinated. Out of respect for the campaign, his funeral procession passed through Resurrection City. The Department of the Interior forced Resurrection City to close on June 24th, 1968, after the permit to use parkland had expired. This slide has an image of the Ministers' March, with Reverend Jesse Jackson and Indian rights activist Melvin Tom, among others, marching and singing together in DC. In face of the setbacks due to political violence and assassinations, as well as the difficulty of sustaining a national movement, the Poor People's Campaign of 1968 nevertheless had an impact, not only on government policies, but also on public perceptions. The campaign pushed Congress and federal agencies to allocate millions for programs such as Head Start and education and welfare services for the Bureau of Indian Affairs, while it also helped catalyze the desegregation of schools and extension of labor programs. Significantly, the campaign introduced new strategies for protest and social change. The movement also helped perform national discussion on race, class, economic opportunities, security, and democracy. The image on this slide is part of a button from the Mother's March, which started the campaign with a Black Madonna and the words Poor People's Campaign, 1968. Over to you, Nell.
Thank you, Reverend Rowan. Now we're going to talk about the current Poor People's Campaign. On December 4th, 2017, the 50th anniversary of the announcement of the first Poor People's Campaign, a diverse leadership came together in Washington, D.C. to launch the new Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, co-chaired by Reverend Dr. William J. Barber II of Repairers of the Breach and Reverend Dr. Liz Theo Harris of the Cairo Center, with the support of many organizations, denominations, and individuals, now in 45 states across the country. The campaign was launched with two primary goals: change the narrative by changing the narrator, meaning putting more focus on who and why people are poor and amplifying the voices of those most impacted by the systemic forces that keep people in poverty, and building power to change policy through a fusion movement that unites communities and partner organizations. And the image on this slide is a photo of Bishop Barber and Reverend Theo Harris wearing "Jesus was a poor man's stoles," standing in front of a rose window. So the new Poor People's Campaign is building on the idea of fusion movements that have brought progressive change throughout history. The Modern Poor People's Campaign, a movement, not a moment. The Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, is an organism, not an organization. Lifts from the bottom. Confronts the interlocking injustices of systemic racism, systemic poverty, the war economy, ecological devastation, and the distorted moral narrative of religious nationalism, and is a fusion movement. What is a fusion movement? It recognizes the construct of race and racism that's used to keep us apart. It builds a broad and diverse coalition. It intentionally is diversified. We engage in indigenously led grassroots organizing with a commitment to nonviolent action. And we're resisting the one moment mentality. We are building a movement. And we'll drop a link to excerpts from the 14 Steps to Moral Fusion Organizing. We'll drop a link to that in the chat. So on this slide is the condensed version of the 12 fundamental principles of the campaign, which guide our work. We read the full set of principles at many local meetings to ground ourselves in the work. And they are well worth time studying if you want to get involved. And again, you can find the full description at the campaign's website, the National Campaign's website, as well as through the link in the chat. And please note that the last principle on the list, embrace nonviolence, is particularly important for folks considering joining the campaign as volunteers. Violent tactics or actions will not be tolerated, period. You will be asked to sign a covenant of nonviolence as part of the California Poor People's Campaign if you engage in any direct action events, such as sitting in at the Capitol in Sacramento, or we were in outside Senate offices and the representatives' offices during the summer. So for those kinds of actions, people are asked to sign the covenant. And it's more than a document just to sign when we're engaging in direct action. It's really an ideal that's woven through all the principles of our campaign, especially because there may be others who try to disrupt or weaken that foundation of our work. And so we're really insistent that people understand and embrace that. So the image on this slide is a Poor People's Campaign sign by artist David Solnit, which says, "We rise together," in Black on a yellow disc with silhouettes of marching people in Black. The button says, "Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival." So given the US population is estimated at over 300 million, the fact that 140 million of our people are poor or low income means that more than 40% of the population lives in poverty or near poverty. These statistics are pre-COVID and don't include the estimated 8 million who have fallen into poverty as a result of the pandemic. So the statistics that we use are drawn from the supplemental poverty measure, an alternative approach to assessing a poverty that differs from the official poverty measure, which is limited and outdated. When it's quoted publicly, the official poverty measure often does not reflect the full scale of poverty in the country. And so you can read more about those measures in the campaign's moral budget, which is on the website, and we're dropping a link in the chat. And so part of grassroots organizing means going out into the community, talking to people, listening to people, engaging with folks who are most affected by the policies that keep people poor. And the campaign has taken to bus tours to engage with their supporters and form state organizing committees. So the early tours brought together those drawn from all segments of the fusion movement. The 2019 tour highlighted the voices of the poor in hearings on homelessness, mass incarceration, and the criminalization of the poor. That I mentioned in my introduction that's how I got connected, was as a testifier in one of those hearings. And we invited public and elected officials to come listen to their constituents who they are not doing a very good job of representing in many, many cases. So during the election year of 2020, the campaign led the mobilizing, organizing, registering, and educating tour, which we called the MORE Tour, to not only register voters, but also to mobilize new and existing campaign supporters to commit to the aims and principles. And this national tour kicked off in June of 2019 and was meant to be ongoing until May of 2020. And in fact, in December of 2019, we had a really amazing tour, a MORE tour stop in San Francisco, which was basically the last in-person event of that tour. And subsequently, 4 states had their tour stops canceled. But basically, you know, everybody here knows that we all had to pivot. And so what we ended up doing was moving those events onto Facebook Live and YouTube Live and Zoom. And recordings of the Facebook Live feeds are still available on the National Campaign's Facebook page. So the image on this slide is about 30 people with signs standing in front of a yellow school bus in Massachusetts. And so People's Campaign is undertaken and continues to conduct extensive research to create accurate information about poverty and the poor. And you'll find links to all these studies and research documents on the campaign's website. We started with the Souls of Poor Folk Moral Audit, which provided a data-driven analysis of the historical and empirical realities of poverty in the last 50 years since the campaign, since the 68 campaign. And the most recent, Waking the Sleeping Giant, Poor and Low-Income Voters in the 2020 Elections, reports findings that support the campaign's analysis that organizing among the poor around an agenda that represents their concerns can fundamentally change the political map of this country and lead to policies that are just and representative for all Americans. So the image on this slide is the logos of the Institute for Policy Studies, the Poor People's Campaign, the Cairo Center, and Repairs of the Breach. And they're spread across the bottom of the slide. And next, we're gonna return to Reverend Rowan, who's gonna talk about the campaign structure.
Thank you.
Mhm.
The Poor People's Campaign is a joint project of 2 anchor organizations, Repairs of the Breach and the Cairo Center. The staff from those nonprofits manage the national campaign, coordinating events, policies, and other activities. The campaign itself is all volunteer. The image description for this slide is a graphic about leadership by David Solnit. The bottom banner says leadership, poor, low income, most impacted. There is a crowd holding signs that say a new unsettling force, and everybody's got a right to live, to breathe, to housing, to health. The structure of the California campaign, we have regional steering committees in addition to state steering committees because we're such a big state. The regions include Oakland, San Francisco Bay Area, Los Angeles, Inland Empire, Sacramento, Orange County, Northeast San Fernando Valley, and San Diego. The new Central Coast region also includes the counties of Santa Barbara, San Luis Obispo, and Ventura. The image description is a map of California showing those regions. Within those statewide regions, how we carry out our business is regional and statewide working groups. You can use the feedback form in the chat to get more information or get connected to statewide or working groups in your region. And there are things like art and theomusicology, finance and fundraising, outreach. This group, speaker training and outreach. We both sponsor the welcome session every month. So there's lots of ways to get involved. And we have some statewide meetings that are, of course, now on Zoom, so anybody on the state can join us. One tool for building community is those statewide meetings, and we always need facilitators for the Jubilee study groups and the welcome sessions and tech support for all the meetings and events. And you don't have to be a lawyer to join the legal working group, which meets bi-monthly. You don't have to be an artist to join the art and theomusicology working group. The image is a Zoom meeting screen in gallery view. Art and theomusicology are integral elements of the campaign, not an afterthought. In 2020, based on the campaign's core message and song, "Everybody's Got a Right to Live," Californians statewide chose a letter to make, took a picture with their letter, which is then assembled into a virtual mural. You may be asked at some point to submit a photo of a letter to help with our messaging. Seeing many people's faces supporting our messages has a special magic. This image is a variety of people holding signs with letters that says California Poor People's Campaign and "Everybody's Got a Right to Live."
Some of you on the call may have joined our Moral Monday broadcast. Some of those were in person, because I know some of the people on the call were with us on, and even on some of the national broadcasts, and others may have joined virtually. And on March 15th of 2021, in more than 30 states, we had demand deliveries of the 14 policy priorities for the first 100 days of the Biden administration that we took to the state capitals. And so here in California, we went to Sacramento, read the 14 points on the Capitol Mall. We had testifiers there. We had theomusicology there, chants, a lot of art, and we delivered those 14 policy priorities to the state legislature. So the image on this slide is a Zoom webinar screen from a Moral Monday showing two scenes in California and an ASL interpreter. So the recently expanded child tax credit means that families that had previously been considered quote unquote too poor to qualify for the benefit are now eligible. The Policy and Political Education Working Group designed informational flyers, which we have been distributing throughout the state. The Benefits Access Working Group has also been doing outreach through its getcovidresources.org portal. So please check that out and share it. That link will be in the chat. The image on this slide is one photo and two flyers. In the upper left, there are three women holding the flyers that are pictured on the bottom of the screen, standing outside. And that was us at the Laney College flea market here in Oakland. I remember that day. We were passing out flyers, and there were lots and lots of families there with young children, and really glad to know about this benefit. And then on the lower left is the black and white flyer with the info about the child tax credit. And on the right side is a flyer from the Sacramento Poor People's Campaign Ice Cream Social, where they distributed info. They decided that, you know, with the hot weather in the summer in Sacramento, that it would be a great family outing to come to a park, have ice cream, and get information about this benefit. On our May 24th Moral Monday, was featured the launch of the third Reconstruction congressional resolution. And you may know that following the end of the Civil War, Reconstruction, driven by a moral fusion movement, people from diverse backgrounds, faith traditions, and geography pushed for progressive changes. The Civil Rights Movement was a second Reconstruction that brought dramatic changes in public policy. And yet the work is undone. So we're building a third Reconstruction to fully address poverty from the bottom up. One of the Jubilee Policy Platform principles is when we lift from the bottom, everybody rises. And the image on this slide is a webinar screen with Bishop Barber, Reverend Dr. Theo Harris, and Congress members Barbara Lee and Pramila Jayapal, who were the co-sponsors of the bill and introduced it to Congress. And then there's an American Sign Language interpreter also on that screen. So the third Reconstruction resolution recognizes that in order to build a true third Reconstruction, we must simultaneously deal with the 5 interlocking injustices. Currently, there are 8 California representatives who've signed on, 41 nationwide. And we're going to drop a link in the chat where you can find out, read the resolution and find out more information about it, find out which congressional reps have signed on. And we are urging people to sign on to a petition, which basically, you know, says that you support the Congress taking up this resolution. So the image on this slide is three pictures. On the upper left, there's a group of 8 people with various banners and signs in Santa Clara County. On the right is a group of 4 people with a Black man holding a microphone in Santa Barbara. And underneath is a photo at Speaker Pelosi's office in San Francisco with a lot of signs and a brass band. Theomusicology is also an organizing tool for the campaign. So fundamental principle number 11 states, we uphold the need to do a season of sustained moral direct action as a way to break through the tweets and shift the moral narrative. We are demonstrating the power of people coming together across issues and geography and putting our bodies on the line to the issues that are affecting us all. Since July 12th, we've had nonviolent direct actions in the states and in Washington, D.C. to press our demands that Congress end the filibuster, pass all provisions of H.R. 1, the For the People Act, fully restore all provisions of the 1965 Voting Rights Act, and raise the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour. And so the images on this slide are 4 photos. Upper left is a banner held by 6 women announcing the women-led march in Washington, D.C. On the lower left, 2 Bay Area women were being processed after having been arrested. The middle right is a photo of a woman being arrested holding a sign that reads, "Protect our vote." And on the far right is a woman in a crowd behind a police line. On July 26th, as part of the season of moral nonviolent direct action, the California campaign held direct actions at Senator Dianne Feinstein's offices in Los Angeles and San Francisco. So the image on this slide is 2 photos. On the left, 4 people holding signs sit blocking an office door. And on the right, 15 people hold a 40-foot banner, a yellow and black banner that reads, "Senator Feinstein, bust the filibuster," in front of an office building. So on Monday, December 13, we're going to be in the streets of Washington, D.C. again to urge Congress to get it done in 2021. We're pressing them to pass the Senate, to pass the Build Back Better Act with all provisions that help the most impacted people intact. And the image on this slide is a banner announcing the December 13 Moral Monday March in Washington in gold on a black background, and the logos of the Poor People's Campaign, the anchor organizations of Repairers of the Breach and Kairos Center, and then some of the national partner organizations across the middle, and across the bottom it says, "Get it done in 2021." So throughout the first part of 2022, we're going to be organizing, mobilizing, registering, educating, engaging, and encouraging people to join the movement who vote. And so we have been letting Congress know we're coming. Hey, Congress, we are going to be there in DC in June of 2022 for an in-person mass Poor People's and Low Wage Workers Assembly. As part of the California Poor People's Campaign, we're going to be hosting a stop of the More Tour here in May. We haven't quite decided where it will be. So, contact your regional representatives if you're interested in working on bringing the More Tour to your region. We definitely need your help. And so the image on this slide is, it's a banner in black, gold, and white with a map of the US on the east of the Mississippi River with arrows pointing toward Washington, D.C. in the upper left-hand corner. and then the co-chairs in front of a massive march in the center. We must do more in the upper right, and then information about the assembly on the bottom in gold with a black background. And so next we have a short promo video about the event that we're going to show you.
We welcome you to the launch of the Mass Poor People's Low Wage Assembly and Moral March on Washington, D.C., June 18, 2022.
We are a new, unsettling force, and we are powerful. New, unsettling force, and we are here.
We're rising up to demonstrate the compelling power that we, poor and low-income people, have to reconstruct society from the bottom up.
And we need to do it with the loudest voices possible, the biggest actions possible.
Because we know that there is no scarcity in this land. The only scarcity is the moral will to do what's right.
Hold on, just a little while longer.
We are those with sub-minimum wage jobs who can't afford sky-high rent.
People with disabilities are the fastest growing minority group.
It's crazy to me that in 2021, it's still legal for workplaces to pay a sub-minimum wage to people with disabilities.
There are still so much trial and tribulations that we go through as Indigenous people. We can't get a decent wage to sustain ourselves, nor can we get adequate housing.
Veterans across this nation say enough is enough. We can't pat essential workers on the back on one day and then cut their health care the next day.
Health is a political choice.
What more do I need to do to prove that my voice is just as valuable as anyone else's?
There are still forces in denial that would try to slow walk our transition to a clean economy and a just future for us all.
We have an immoral system run by immoral people.
But together we walk, and we walk and we fight.
It's time for a change. Reconstruyamos esta gran nación.
See, we are people of resilience. As we fight these interlocking injustices together,
When we work together, mobilize together, and rise together, we become a voice for the voiceless, and we become an agent of change in a time where great change is needed.
We need the third Reconstruction to ensure that deaf people, people with disabilities, and all people can have the right to live and to thrive.
We know what they are doing, but the question is, what are we going to do? Reconstruction begins when we change our mentality and say it's time for you to get your foot off of my neck.
justice is coming soon. Hey, do you believe that of today?
So you've heard a lot about the campaign, about how to get involved with working groups and stuff, but even if you're not ready to join a working group, there are lots of ways to follow us. Join us on the Poor People's Campaign website, check out the Third Reconstruction Resolution, and the image on this screen is the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival poster with a silhouette of marchers across the top. You can find us on Twitter, and both the national campaign and the California campaign. And the image is a young Black man with a megaphone in front of a march with a banner and many people. You can find us on Facebook, the national and the California campaign, and actually the Bay Area campaign has our own Facebook as well. The image is another wonderful David Silnet illustration for the Jubilee Policy Platform, include a needle and thread stitching together the nation with a moral revolution. Moral revolution. At the bottom are tags with 5 interlocking injustices and a pair of scissors. We appreciate donations in any amount. Right now, we're fundraising to bring poor and low wealth impacted people to DC next year, and that will take a lot of money. So if you're able, please consider donating to us through our fiscal sponsor, ITINA, Environmentalism Through Inspiration and Nonviolent Action. Please check the link in the chat. Thank you for attending. Please fill out the feedback form by clicking a copy of the link from the chat. It includes space to say how you'd like to get involved. The image description is people marching behind a Poor People's Campaign banner in Washington, DC. And now we will get ready for our breakout rooms. You've already renamed yourself, so you'll be put in a room with other folks from your region. We'll have about 20 minutes. When you get in the room, introduce yourself with your name, pronouns, location, and share one thought or reflection. Please be sure that everybody has time to speak. See you in 20 minutes.
Great. Thank you so much, Reverend Rowan. And so I've set up 3 breakout rooms so that there would be about 4 to 5 people in each room. And because we're a big state and we don't have 5 people from every region, we have like a Southern California group, a Northern California group, and then a group of other folks who are, from like singlets. And so, yeah, please introduce yourselves to the folks who are in your room, and we'll see you in 20 minutes. So I'm going to open the rooms, and I'll give you a warning when it's about when we're about 10 minutes through, so that to be sure that everybody gets a chance to speak. And then you'll get a 2-minute warning at the end before you come back here. All righty. So you should have an invitation.
And so we do this every month. Tell your friends, and we've begun alternating. This month was at 3:30. Next month will be at 6:30. So people who are working can also learn more about the campaign. And then in February, we'll be back to 3:30 every other month. And so please, invite your friends to come and learn more about the campaign if you think they'd be interested.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all for being here. And welcome, Carla. We let you in just in time to help us close out. So Reverend Rowan just got finished saying that we'll be back next month, January the 3rd or 4th at 6:30 in the evening for another welcome.
Check your email.
We do them monthly. And so everybody is welcome to come back. And if you put on the feedback form, let's put the feedback form in the chat once more so that Carla has a chance to have that. And it gives some information about various working groups that you can join. And if you want to have speakers come to your region, or, just want to be in touch. So one of the traditions in the Poor People's Campaign is that we have a call and response that we often use to close things out. And so, so I can go ahead and do that. So the call is forward together. And
not one step back
is that. And so why don't you do it, Reverend Rowan?
Forward together.
Not one step back.
Forward together.
Not one step back.
Forward together.
Not one step back.
So it may be.
Yes. Maybe so. Thank you so much, Reverend Rowan, and thank you, Peg, for tech support. We also are always looking for people who can help on calls with tech support. So, feel free to let us know what your skills and interests are. And we are going to be moving and shaking in Southern California, I can tell.
Yes.
God bless everybody.
All right. Thank you all for being here. Until the next time, be safe and well.
Thank you.
Until next time.
Yep.